Hey there, it's Joe Pardavila. Welcome back to another episode of Forbes Books Radio, and I am about to blow your mind. The current healthcare system in the U.S. is flawed. Yeah, I know you might not recover from that statement, but what if we were able to improve patient access, reduce costs, and shorten patient wait times? Joining me today are two guys who have done that. Their names are Mohan Giridharadas and Sanjeev Agrawal. They're senior executives at LeanTaaS, a company that believes that advanced data science can solve tough operational problems in healthcare. They're also the authors of the upcoming book, Better Healthcare Through Math. Mohan, how are you?
Hey, Joe, how are you?
And Sanjeev, how are things with you?
Very good. Thanks for having us, Joe.
You're very welcome, Sanjeev. Now, before we get into the book, Better Healthcare Through Math, I want to talk about LeanTaaS. Mohan, what does LeanTaaS actually do?
What LeanTaaS does is use advanced mathematics and data science and scalable software to unlock capacity in health systems. And what this does is it makes access more readily available. Patients can get appointments more quickly. It reduces the wait time for patients, and it just improves the overall financial performance of the health system.
And Sanjeev, let's talk about how LeanTaaS has evolved. How did it become a game changer by using AI and algorithmic learning?
Yeah, you're right that it's today, if you look at a snapshot in time, we work with 100 of the country's top healthcare systems using AI to, as Mohan said, unlock capacity. But it all started small, like it does for almost any company. Our first foray into this business was working with Stanford Healthcare on helping them level load their infusion chairs, which was an area of a huge importance to them because not only is it a revenue generating part of the business, but it's more importantly, long wait times are a huge cause of dissatisfaction for people who come into infusion centers. So long story short, we started with one hospital and one part of a hospital 5 years ago. And over time, we found that this infusion center problem was a common one across thousands of infusion centers across the country. And so we built repeatable, packageable software that embedded some of those core mathematical principles on the infusion product. So we have an entire product line that works with over 300 infusion centers. Along the way, our hospital partners introduced us to other problems they have, unlocking capacity in operating rooms, unlocking capacity in inpatient beds, many other parts of the hospital. So collectively, we've now grown to over 100 health systems and 300 plus infusion centers plus 250 other hospitals we work with.
Awesome. And Mohan, you guys are obviously very successful at this point, but healthcare analytics, was that always the goal? Because most entrepreneurs find a problem and solve it. Was your initial foray into working with Sanjeev, was it always healthcare analytics?
No, it wasn't actually. The original concept was just operational excellence delivered with data science and software. We didn't quite know which industry or which problem we would focus on. And so we built the ability to very rapidly design and deploy a custom software application across a bunch of different industries. We were in retail, healthcare, banking, insurance, technology, etc. And one of the problems solved in that way was the problem Sanjeev was mentioning, the infusion center problem at Stanford. The key issue was to pivot to a scalable solution. So when Sanjeev came on board, the first thing we did was look at the 25 applications we had, and within the first week, killed almost all of them.
Wow.
And decided to double down on the infusion problem.
That's crazy, Mohan, because so you guys had built this structure, but you guys weren't exactly sure who would be best for. Sanjeev, did you guys have any inclination that of all those options you had that healthcare would be the one, or maybe in the early process you're like, oh no, this could work in another sector?
Yeah, look, when you're starting a company out, you start with what strengths you have. And our strengths were, as Mohan described, operational excellence and mathematics. And one of the issues with that, having those two strengths, is they can be applied anywhere. And that's why we did apply them in 25 different industries for 25 different projects. But to Mohan's point, we then went through a fairly disciplined process to ask ourselves, okay, of all of these industries where we've applied this capability to, it's a bit like a hammer, right? You can apply it to many, many problems. Where is it the most valuable? Where will it have the highest impact? Where is there an actual market where there are thousands of buyers that may be interested in solving a problem? And frankly, where is this a forward-looking problem instead of a backwards-looking problem? Meaning, which industry is going to need this kind of innovation? Like every entrepreneur does, you bet on a future where you think the puck's moving to. And so we happened to bet 5 years ago on healthcare, and it's panned out pretty well so far.
Wow. So in a way, I mean, you say you bet on Mohan. Did you guys feel it was ever a gamble, or did you feel like, hey, this is the best way for us to go?
It was definitely a gamble, because by choosing what not to do, we shut down 20 different applications that were collectively generating $2 million plus in revenue. As a small company, to walk away from revenue is very, very difficult. And we didn't have the cash to sustain it. So it was certainly a bet. And there was easily a period of 12 to 18 months where if the thing hadn't taken off quite as quickly as it had, and we weren't able to raise funds from strategic investors at that point, we didn't have any financial investors, we wouldn't have had the dry powder and ammunition to build what we needed to build, hire the team we needed to hire, and make the progress that we've made.
Sanjeev, do me a favor. Take me back to that 12 to 18-month period that Mohan was referring to. And this is great for all entrepreneurs listening. What were you guys saying to each other during that year-plus time frame? Were you guys all sort of your own motivational speaker or your Instagram motivational meme? Like, what were you guys saying to each other because as we've said multiple times, it was a gamble. You bet on this. During that time frame, were you guys freaking out? Were you guys propping each other up?
I had my honeymoon period for the first year where people kind of believed that the direction we were going in was worth going in. And so, frankly, it wasn't just the two of us. Remember, we had a team of working on IQ for that's about 7 people, which we grew to about 30. And I think one of the things that gave us a lot of belief was early successes, to Mohan's point, because when we took the success at Stanford to other people that felt and sounded like Stanford, there was a uniform acceptance of the fact that this was an important problem to solve. So if you think about what provides the most motivation to an entrepreneur, it's really the market. When you build something and you innovate, and the market, which is a group of buyers that have the same set of problems and that refer to each other in making a buying decision, when they tell you, yes, you've solved something of importance to me, and by the way, I'm willing to pay for it, there is no better tonic for an entrepreneur. Then, of course, there is your team, where because we were in the business of and still are in the business of improving healthcare operations, it's not that difficult to motivate ourselves to work on something that truly means something to the planet. And so it's just not a matter of making money, but if you can actually work on something important while making money and increasing the valuation of your company and getting customers, the motivation can be sustained for a long, long period of time.
Oh, it's amazing. And, we kind of jumped to the Stanford Healthcare, which was the game changer for the company, but we shouldn't sort of just be very flippant about that. I mean, Stanford Healthcare is a very prominent organization. How did you even get your foot in through the door with them?
What happened was, we were in the world when we were solving lots of different problems. Stanford was actually one of our first customers on a completely different problem. They wanted us to build analytics to look at their patient satisfaction scores. They were getting the patient satisfaction scores from Press Ganey, but it wasn't in an easily consumable format. And so they wanted us to help do the analysis on that. So we'd been doing that for 3 or 4 years, and we knew them quite well. And they liked all of that. They knew we had operational excellence. They knew we knew how to build algorithms and software. And so they approached us one day, the head of cancer, and said, I've got a problem. My infusion center wait times keep climbing. I keep hiring more and more nurses, so my labor costs are climbing faster than my revenue, but I don't seem to be bending the wait time curve. Do you guys think you could work on it? And at that stage, we had no idea. So we, said, sure, we can. Let's work on it. And we spent 6 months working side by side with them, solving the problem. And it was only after we solved it that we started to say, this could be applicable to many other places. And we didn't have the bandwidth to do market research. So we talked to 2 friends in 2 other health systems. and asked them to give us introductions, and they did. And those two systems also said, wow, this applies to us. And that's when we knew we had the makings of something that could be scaled.
Wow. I mean, I love these sort of like what if stories. It's like the comic book, what if so-and-so was this superhero. But I'm just imagining, Sanjeev, if Stanford didn't come out of nowhere and bring up this problem that the guys needed to solve, do you have any idea where the company would be now? I mean, because maybe you may have found this down the road, but like it's amazing how you guys were sort of doing something, but right. Then Stanford came in and said, "Hey, you guys are doing good with that, but we have something else you can help us with." If that didn't happen, where would LeanTaaS be now? I wouldn't be talking to you guys, would I?
You might still be.
Oh, okay.
And I'll tell you why, because the muscles that the company had built in the first 5 years of being able to look at a hard problem in any space and apply math to it and then build software around it is actually a pretty important muscle in many, many industries. So the fact that there were 25 other projects, and I still remember actually when we did the structured, disciplined process of whittling down which ones we'd work on or which one we'd work on, there was a second and a third choice. Just to give you a simple example, a still unsolved problem is how do you deduplicate records from across multiple databases? So when a bank acquires another bank and all their customers merge, you need to be able to come up with a way to streamline the final set of customers that are deduplicated. So, you could have an account with both banks.
Right.
And that was one of the problems we'd worked on, which we stopped working on when we chose to go to healthcare.
Got it.
So, and there were many other similar problems. So I'm not sure we'd be doing the same thing. It probably wouldn't be healthcare, but it would be another really interesting problem that is so difficult that unless you apply the principles of mathematics, you couldn't solve it.
That's awesome. Well, the title of the book and the podcast that's coming out is Better Healthcare Through Math. A very simple title for a major problem. Mohan, explain to me the title Better Healthcare Through Math.
Here's the reality. Healthcare delivery has become 100x more complicated today than it was 50 years ago in terms of the quality of the technology, the kinds of tests they can run, the innovation into new non-invasive surgeries, et cetera, et cetera. However, the scheduling of medical appointments is no different than it was 50 years ago. Two people chat, they look at a calendar and they say, Joe, 10 o'clock Wednesday. Mm-hmm. Nobody ran any math on the demand patterns, the supply availabilities, the constraints, the interconnectedness, the likely delays, none of that. So our core concept is how can we use sophisticated math to predict the demand side as best as we can, knowing it's actually impossible to predict precisely, how we can predict the supply side in terms of people, rooms, equipment, availabilities, etc., and do our best job of matching it in a resilient way. So that if you're a little bit off on the demand or a little bit off on the supply, it's like a shock absorber that still works, right? You need to build it in that manner. So that was our key insight, that we can go asset by asset and in a deeply deliberate way and in a deeply detailed manner, build out the mathematics of supply-demand matching in as near a real-time window as we can.
Okay.
So that's the core construct.
All right. And Sanjeev, in the book, I want to just pluck one of the anecdotes here because I think it's an easy way to sort of explain it in layman's terms, is the scheduling of an MRI machine.
So the basic concept let's take it from a patient's perspective or a user's perspective, that if you got an order from your doctor to go get an MRI done and you called for that MRI appointment, it could well be the case that the appointment you get is a few days out. And when you show up, it could well be the case that you have to wait a little bit because someone else is using the machine or the staff's not there. However, if you actually stand next to that MRI machine over, say, a week long period of time during working hours, there will be many spots that are on the calendar that are 20, 25, 30 minutes long, which is about the length of time it would take to get your MRI done, where that machine was not in use. And the reason this happens is that unlike booking tennis courts, booking any healthcare appointment requires a much more sophisticated understanding of supply and demand. So let's go into that for a quick 10 seconds because that's important. When you're booking a tennis court, the only things that need to come together is the court and you and potentially your tennis partner. And making those available precisely at 7 o'clock when you book the court is not that hard because if someone else is playing, when you show up and it's 7 o'clock, you can actually say, hey, this is my court. Can I please get it? I reserved it. The problem in healthcare is if you go get an MRI done, for example, the sequence of steps it takes when you show up. You go in, you fill a form, you wait, you get a cup of water, you change into whatever it is you need to change into, then you go in, they take your vitals. There are many, many steps to an actual appointment. And so if your appointment is at, say, 6:15 a.m. and you get there at 6:08, you may not be on the MRI machine until 6:29. And that's not predictable because 19 things needed to happen for you to actually get up on there. Now, the actual person operating the machine and doing your MRI, they are also human in the sense that they also take a series of steps that's different from being a robot or a machine. So the same MRI could take 23 minutes or 27 minutes, depending on the patient or the day. So because of this variability in a multi-step process, the ability to predict exactly how long the appointment is going to take is very low. So that's what we call demand variability. How many people are going to need MRIs? How long is each MRI going to take? Then on the supply side, if you only have one MRI machine, you're obviously restricted as to when you can bring people in. And so most people that don't use sophisticated mathematics end up building rules of thumb-based schedules. Saying, yeah, you know what, let's do this. Let's only schedule patients at the top of the hour. So 6 a.m., 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m. The problem is the 6 a.m. patient could come and then at 6:37 they're done and that machine's now sitting idle for 23 minutes. Meanwhile, the next patient comes late at, say, 7:15, pushing the 8 a.m. patient later. And that's what leads to this situation of, hey, I can't get an appointment when I want it. When I do, it's a few days out. I show up, I'm made to wait. But the machine itself, which is the most expensive and constrained part of this equation, could have been sitting idle for a while.
So then how do you guys fix that problem? Because it seems like at this point it's just human error. Like you said, it's let's set we're going to do an appointment on the top of every hour. We're going to do it, and then we'll take a break for lunch. We'll come back. We'll do a couple at 3 and 4 o'clock, and then we're done for the day. So then what do you guys do, Sanjeev?
So what we do is very similar to what other industries that face the same problems do. So, if you think about the problem you just described, that's no different than UPS that needs to plan to get its trucks to deliver 16 million packages from point A to point B, not knowing where each of these packages is going to originate and where it's going to end up. Or if you think about when you go into Google Maps or Waze, and it says, hey, next Friday you're driving from San Diego Airport to the zoo, it's going to take 42 minutes. Well, how does it know that? This boils down to the same 4 or 5 deeply mathematically rich concepts with a deep understanding of the domain. So every asset, be it an MRI machine or an infusion chair or any other asset in a hospital, has a very unique demand-supply pattern which can be predicted. So the equivalent of Waze predicting what traffic on a quarter-mile segment of a road will look like anywhere in the world on any given Friday is for any MRI institution with an MRI or an infusion chair or an OR predicting what a future day is going to look like. So what that ends up being is the first hard step of this process is predicting how many people are likely to need an MRI or any treatment on any given day of the week in the future. Within a certain band, you'll never be precise. Part of that is also how long their MRIs are expected to last. So what's the nature of the MRI? Some will be shorter, some will be longer. MRIs will probably have less variation than other clinical appointments, but they'll still have some variation. So if you can predict into the future how many patients of what kinds of treatment will show up in my MRI center or infusion center or in my OR, you're then able to predict, given how many nurses I have, how much staff I have, what the best time to slot them in is. And so if you then slot them in logically based on completing essentially a Tetris game that you always win. So conceptualize a patient as a Tetris block of a certain length. If you've ever played the game of Tetris, people always lose. I always lost. And the reason I lost was I never knew where to move the exact Tetris block to. So conceptually, think about us in the case of the MRI or some of these outpatient appointments as giving you the right starting point for any given Tetris block brick that is of a specific length by first predicting how many Tetris blocks of each type will be there And if you started them at what time, would you be able to maximize the number of patients you could fit, given that your supply of where you need to fit these Tetris blocks is fixed? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no. So my follow-up to that then is, Mohan, if you have this solution to this problem with LeanTaaS, what does then the healthcare system do? Is it, I mean, I'm sure it's not like a sheet of paper with carbon paper on the other side of it. Is there some sort of software system that handles this? Because you've sort of taken all the thinking out of the healthcare system by just keeping it strictly to analytics.
So what happens is you'll struggle to get a health system to use another screen to do scheduling because they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars deploying their EHR. And so they want to schedule off of the EHR. The current appointment template design in the EHR is based on the tennis court kind of mindset.
Great.
And so what we've done by taking on the crazy hard math problem is we've given them a much more intelligent, nuanced way of solving it by saying on Mondays, you should offer up this kind of treatment at 7:10, 7:40, 8:20. You should offer up those kinds of treatments on Tuesdays at 8:30 and 9:40, etc. Right?
And so, Mohan, is that integrated into the EHR?
It's not automatically integrated in it. We take it and help them build it into the EHR.
Oh, okay.
These things don't need to be changed every day. So there's really no need for us to have an automatic technical integration because the moment you try and write into someone's EHR, it becomes a big complicated project because health systems understandably are very jumpy about letting third parties write into their EHR and their system of record. And so you would needlessly activate all the air defense systems if you tried to do that. So what we do is we say, here's our intelligent recommendation. Let's help you build it into the EHR and replace your intuitive gut feel like templates with mathematically sophisticated templates. Now you continue to schedule using your EHR. And guess what? We've made every one of your schedulers into the Roger Federer of schedulers. They play a perfect game automatically every time because we just made them that good.
And now, Sanjeev, I mean, obviously the people in the medical profession, they're very intelligent. There's no need to, it's kind of a stupid statement to say they're smart people, but they are creatures of habit. So is this a difficult sell to them, to healthcare systems who are like, hey, we've been doing this way for 30 years. We've been doing the tennis court model, and it's working just fine for us. do you need to sell them on this, or is it pretty much plain as day when you present them what you're able to accomplish with better healthcare through math?
You know, that's a great question. And in the book, we have an entire chapter dedicated to some of the restricting core beliefs that prevent change from happening. And so if you think about the question, why hasn't this changed for 30 years? Like you said, the folks in healthcare are smart. There are mathematicians and data scientists out there. 3 reasons why it's not as difficult anymore to convince people. First is that the technology and the ability to actually scale what we do hasn't been around all that long, maybe the last 5 to 7 years. And so we're one of the first folks to actually get this up and running and scale to as many systems. And so it's a bit like the first time you saw OpenTable or the first time you saw Kayak and you were used to calling your travel agent.
Right.
And was it nice and comfortable to call your travel agent? Absolutely. But then when you discovered the power of being able to book your own tickets 24/7 and change them, suddenly a light bulb went off in your head. And you said, boy, I've been waiting for this forever. But the internet didn't exist before that, right? So part of it is just the availability of the tool sets and how easy these tools are to use wasn't the case. And so one of the reasons why people being creatures of habit, they didn't change was there was no eBay. So the only way I got rid of stuff in my garage is to have a garage sale. And I didn't know the art of the possible. So showing people how easy it is works really well. The second is structurally the healthcare industry is going through very rapid change, obviously right now because of COVID, but even in the pre-COVID world, the need to be efficient is no longer a luxury. Efficiency is a requirement because much like the banks experienced in the early 2000s and many other industries like retail have experienced, if you want to stay in business, you have to become extremely operationally efficient. You can't keep spending your way out of trouble because capital is limited. And so healthcare is now looking for ways to be efficient above and beyond their traditional means of process improvement and Six Sigma, which are also relevant, but are don't work as well if you're starting with a bad hand. So the second driver is just the need for efficiency in healthcare and the availability of solutions being the first one. The third, to be honest with you, the regimes are changing. The people who are now running these health institutions in their daily lives use tools like OpenTable and Kayak and Google and all these other tools. And when they come to work, suddenly they are faced with having to use tools that were built 40 years ago and are hard to use and are not optimizing their schedules. It's not as difficult as a sell as you might think. Maybe 10 years ago it would have been, but it's becoming a lot easier given those three factors.
Wow.
We made a conscious decision to not opine on clinical matters. So what we do is operational efficiency, and we're able to say, look, with our solutions, the doctor doesn't need to do anything differently. We're not trying to say our clinical judgment is better than yours or our clinical methods are better than yours. By ceding the expertise and the authority on all things clinical, we are saying our stuff will help you optimize your operations, and you can continue to practice medicine exactly the way you always have. And so that actually works out quite well because you're not trying to fight the conventional wisdom on how to do something.
And so I know what the systems you have put in place, they improve patient access, they shorten patient waiting times, but what is the carrot for the healthcare industry? Like, how much are they saving? Because this is a silly way to phrase it because I know you guys are all about science and data and numbers, but what are the tangible results that you're seeing with these systems in place, Mohan?
The economic impact is pretty significant. So even a thing like infusion, if you think about every chemotherapy appointment, is a very expensive appointment because chemo drugs are expensive. So by allowing them to see 10 or 15% more patients within the same cost envelope of hours and staffing, we're able to unlock $20,000 per chair per year. For the OR, it's even more dramatic. The operating rooms are the financial backbone of a health system, right? 40% of the revenues and 60% of the profits of a health system come through the OR. And following the OR, people need to be admitted into beds and so on. We are able to unlock 5 or 6 points of utilization during prime time for the OR, which means it's unlocking on the order of $400,000 or $500,000 of value per OR per year. Now, a decent-sized health system could have 100 ORs and 200 ORs. So we're talking about tens and tens of millions of dollars a year of value being unlocked, which is anywhere from 10 to 20 times the cost of deploying the product. So the economic return on investment for doing the product is such a no-brainer, and we are so confident of it that we guarantee that the product will work. Otherwise, we'll refund all the money.
So you're saying in your successful cases, which I'm sure most of them are, you're saving healthcare systems tens of millions of dollars?
Yes.
Wow. Then why is not every healthcare system signing up with LeanTaaS, Sanjeev? What's
will,
going on?
Well, every health system is a LeanTaaS customer. Some of them just don't know it yet.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Mohan's right, and so are you, that the pace of adoption of technology in any industry is characteristic of that industry, as you know. So, not all banks are equally sophisticated. Not all retailers are equally sophisticated. I walk into my local grocery store and it accepts mobile payments. I walk into a local bagel shop and it doesn't. So, and they're both retailers. What we're doing and what we've seen so far is definitely like any other technology adoption curve. There are early adopters, there are innovators, there are followers, and then there will be people who will lag, who will maybe want to do some of this themselves and then learn the hard way that it's kind of hard to do. It's as if I were trying to become a surgeon. It would take me a long time to learn how to do something, even though I'm not dumb, but we're very good at what we do. So eventually all health systems will have to optimize their schedules. They may or may not work with LeanTaaS, but if they don't optimize their schedules and don't get operationally efficient, they will fall behind and get less competitive. We expect that the marketplace for healthcare services is really not that different from any other marketplace, where the fittest will survive and will gain more market share. And so this is not an option anymore.
And speaking of options, we are now in this COVID-19 world. We don't know the end of it or when we'll get on the other side of the curve, as we keep hearing about. So, Mohan, how is COVID-19 going to change the way things work?
Well, what COVID-19 did was create shocks to the system, both the demand side and the supply side, right? On the demand side, you suddenly got a huge increase in a specific kind of treatment required, right? On the supply side, you suddenly had to create social distancing, which means you use every alternate chair and you can't use wards of beds that are close together. You can't have patients hanging out in waiting rooms. It ended up creating both demand side and supply side shocks. Our tools work on that. People could, in fact, use our tools to say, what if I change my hours of operation? What if I had fewer patients coming in? How best should I adjust my templates? In some ways, what COVID did was it amplified the power of our methodology. And we found that during the COVID crunch, we were able to, in fact, close a few deals faster and go live even more quickly because of the urgency created by it.
If you think about, in addition to the demand supply shocks that Mohan mentioned, the need to be agile, the need to be able to turn on a dime, to open and close operating rooms or beds, to be resilient to these shocks that are completely unexpected by definition, requires you have to move away from a manual way of doing things to an automated way of doing things. And so quite directly, people have been using our tools to assess demand supply balances and imbalances almost on a daily basis that if you required people to do by hand would never happen. It would be complete chaos if you tried to, for example, airline seats. Imagine what the airlines have to do these days by way of managing supply and demand. It's very similar for hospitals.
And Sanjeev, on that, talking about the shock, did you guys have to do anything on the back end? Because since you guys are all going from data that you've accumulated over time, you have this whole new wrinkle, a pretty large wrinkle. But did you guys have to sort of repurpose some of your data or software to figure out where the supply and demand issues would arise?
That's a really, really good question, and it has 2 or 3 different elements to it. The first one is, in a demand supply shock situation, you cannot actually use historical data that you were using because it's not relevant anymore.
Right, unless you go back to the Spanish flu, right? Do you have some of the data from the... You can work that in, right, Sanjeev?
Exactly. So, but then the second part, which is actually more important, is it's not as if hospitals are necessarily looking for predictions. They're just looking at a way to accommodate all the demand that they do have and manage it with the existing supply. Because what's happening on a daily basis with states closing, then opening back up, and then partially closing, and then opening back up again, the need is to say, how can I most efficiently take the supply of services and resources I have and allocate it in a way that I can maximize the number of patients I do need to see? So if you take the specific case of, say, operating room surgeries that Mohan mentioned are the economic backbone of a hospital, if you can imagine in each hospital the amount of backlog that's been built because many of these ORs were closed for weeks. And now what's important to them is to understand, where is this backlog? Which of my surgeons will bring how many cases and when, and how critical will they be? Instead of trying to forecast based on historical data, they just want transparency and visibility into where is the backlog. Who do I prioritize? Who do I get in first? The second part is, now that I've prioritized it, how do I make it really simple for these surgeons to get access to the right operating room that can actually accommodate their patient and do it without having to have a lot of manual back and forth between their office and the OR, and do it much like OpenTable. When they bring patients in and I have to, maybe I have staffing constraints because some of the folks that work in my hospital, people are tired. People have been working very long days. And so I may have a staffing shortage some days. I may have equipment shortages, like my robot room may not be available. The highest order bit right now is not necessarily predicting what's going to happen 3 days from now. It's actually enabling maximization of access to the resources that I have in a way that they are filled most effectively during business hours. And that's why our tools have been working extremely well.
Well, before I let you go, Mohan, we've talked about, how well you guys are doing, how these healthcare companies are saving millions and millions of dollars. But for the layperson out there, like myself, for the regular person, how does better healthcare through math and what LeanTaaS is doing, how is it helping the everyday person who needs their healthcare to survive, or even just is contributing to a healthcare plan? How is this helping people?
At the end of the day, healthcare is one of the largest single line items on the GDP, right? It's a very, very expensive service. And all the indicators are the demand is going up. People are getting older. People are getting more chronic illnesses. The population is growing. And meanwhile, the reimbursement levels are under pressure from insurance, from Medicare, from just the financial health of health systems. So the old methods of build more hospitals, build more ORs, hire more doctors, hire more nurses, those methods are no longer sufficient. What Better Healthcare Through Math is doing is enabling health systems to get the most out of the assets they already have. So if you just step back to 100,000 feet, 5,000 hospitals in the country on average have $300 or $400 million worth of assets each. Even a small mid-sized hospital would have that. That's $2 trillion of assets deployed in this country. Imagine if you could improve their utilization. That translates into lower costs, lower premiums, better access, more rapid access, etc. And so that's the way we think about how Better Healthcare Through Math can move the needle on the operations of healthcare systems in this country and bring the operational sophistication on par with the clinical sophistication.
Let's think about what if we as a country did not do better healthcare through math. The flip side of thinking about it that way is the kid who is going to live to be, I believe, 150, maybe even 200 years old, has already been born. And the reason is that we're all living longer. So if you think about a population that's growing even at 1 or 2% a year, that's living longer, that has more chronic disease, the need for touch points with the healthcare system will be much higher even 5 years from now, and 10 years from now, and 15 and 20 years from now. In 2017, I think 300 million Americans saw the doctor 1.2 billion times, so roughly 4 times per person. That number will go up, and the number of people will go up, and the number of chronic diseases will go up. How are we going to handle that if we continue to schedule tennis courts as opposed to be far more efficient in the way we schedule? So think about the fact that we spend 17% of GDP on healthcare already. From a layman's person's perspective, the most draconian way of looking at this is that unless we solve this problem of access and cost through scientific tools, we may be living in a world where you have to pay a lot more as an individual for healthcare, and moving to the point where, God forbid, we use the word ration for how much healthcare you can actually get, and different qualities of healthcare being available to different people, which is not the world anyone wants to live in. Certainly, I don't want my kids to live in that world, because they probably will if we don't address it now.
Their names are Mohan Giridharadas and Sanjeev Agrawal. Their upcoming book is titled Better Healthcare Through Math. And if you want more information on their company, go to LeanTaaS.com. That's LeanTaaS.com. Mohan and Sanjeev, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome, guys. That's it for this edition of Forbes Books Radio. We're available every week, and we offer stories and knowledge from the world's top business thought leaders. You can subscribe to Forbes Books Radio on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. Your time is valuable, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen. Till next time.
This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio. Find out more at ForbesBooksRadio.com.